So welcome to our meeting on Cyberops for instructor training class. Thank you everybody for being here. It is the 25th. I apologize for last week's meeting having to cancel. I got some things come up at work, and then we were really kind of ahead of the ball game in this class. So we've got roughly a little over a month of class left, and we're in real good shape in terms of that. I've had a couple of your classmates actually already finish the hands-on final. Don't forget, the hands-on final for this class is actually inside of NetLabs. So when you log into NetLabs and you go in to do the lab reservation, you just go in and say new lab for myself. You go find our course, which obviously is our Cyberops Associate for ITC, and then you do the skills assessment here. Now this is one, it does not allow you to preview. I think if you do preview, it says it will not do it because it is a hands-on test. But you can schedule it. I do suggest scheduling it for 4 hours. I don't think it'll take you 4 hours, but use the full 4-hour block when you schedule it, just so you don't have, don't get in any tizzy or get kind of upset that the time's starting to run out. I don't think it will, like I said. But you schedule this and then go through the skills assessment. I will know that you've done it, but also if you'll fill out the document and upload it into our class, you're inside of NetAcad here. I've got so many classes now I've got open.
Hey, Kelly.
Yes.
Can you, we have our own net labs, and I've been doing the stuff in that. Am I supposed to be turning stuff into you, or does that matter?
That's for you, Julie, that's fine. You're a special case scenario. So
okay.
That's fine. And if anybody has,
well, she gets away with it.
Well,
I can still upload. The
right
document. That's okay. But
yeah, just upload the document. In fact, though, if you do have your own NetLab system, I'm fine with you doing them on your own system to test your system. In fact, that's a good idea. I found actually through this class, thankfully for Dr. Sin, he helped me find an error that we had in our setup for all of our pods. I actually had to go back in and redo every single PC, one of the PCs. And I mentioned that in class. So yes, if you've got your own NetLabs, you can use it. Just do upload for me the document so I'll have it.
Okay.
One thing I'm struggling with, folks, in fact, I think I gave myself, injured my arm trying to grade. We've got to find a better way to grade things because I'm having this new system is tough to grade with.
Oh, I hate it.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the grading system right now. They're working on some things, thank goodness. So we'll hopefully get that taken care of. Other thing, if you're watching this late, I've sent out emails mentioning it, but if you want to take another course with us this summer, I do have a little bit of grant funding left from my Cisco grant in the spring. We didn't use all of it because you just get things going on, and you get so many. We had 135 instructors start classes in February, so it was one of our biggest registrations in a while. But we got a little money left over, so if you're interested, let me know and I'll get you on the list. So I need your name, email address, and your and school you're associated with and what class you want. Now, obviously, that's only open for people who are currently instructors in our training classes or at one of our supported academies. And in fact, you don't have to be one of our supported academies. As long as you're in a Cisco academy, we'll try to help you out because we did that with this last grant. So, all right. So I'm going to look at 17, 18, and 19. They're not very long modules. In fact, 18 is super short. But what we're going to look at is just a couple different types of vulnerabilities. We've already talked about vulnerabilities such as what I call protocol vulnerabilities. And that is, can anybody think of a protocol vulnerability associated with TCP? What's a common attack that hits TCP due to the way TCP is actually created or used?
SYN flooding?
Exactly, Joseph, SYN flooding. There's no way we can completely do away with SYNs and SYN acts because that is a part of the protocol itself. And then hackers can turn that and use it for SYN floods. The same thing can happen with our switches. At layer 2, all switches, as we know, have MAC address tables. And in those MAC address tables, they keep the MAC addresses of the devices that are on each port. And they usually learn that by looking at the source MAC addresses on frames that come in on a switch. The thing that a hacker will do is a hacker will try to either flood the MAC address table on a switch to the point to where it's full. Now, this is very easy to do, by the way. There's a large number of little small programs you can run to flood a table. What happens to a switch when its MAC address table is flooded and full, completely full? Does anybody know?
Well, as long as the address is in the MAC table, everything still works. The problem is that if you have to add more stuff, then you start kicking other people out.
Well, and also what they'll normally do, because the switch is typically most switches are what we call default open. When the MAC address table fills up, instead of dropping traffic, it then starts flooding traffic to every port, including the port it came, except for the port it came in on. So it starts acting like a repeater or a hub. So if you can fill up a MAC address table on a switch completely, that switch starts acting like a hub. Well, then if you've got a sniffer, you're able to grab all that traffic. That's one danger.
So spanning tree doesn't help that at all? Spanning tree doesn't stop the flooding? It just...
Spanning tree will not stop that because it's not a loop. It's not a loop. And so as long as it's not a loop, spanning tree won't care. Now, what does stop that we already have learned in CCNA is port security. So if you set port security on a port and say allow 4 MAC addresses, if a hacker takes a device and puts it on there and tries to flood that particular port with thousands of MAC addresses, the port shuts itself down. If you've got it set to shut down. Of course, there's protect and there's oh, help me. It's shut down, protect, and
restrict.
Restrict. Thank you. Yes. So depending on how you have it set, it will either shut the port down or it will issue an error and only allow once the timer's done, or not issue an error and allow more once the timer's out. So one of the is restrict or protect. So we can fix that by, quite honestly, port security. If we don't have port security, though, this is what can happen. We can end up with a hacker taking the MAC address table and spoofing the MAC address for, let's say they spoof it for the default gateway for a segment. If they can do that, the hope then is that they can start becoming a man-in-the-middle attack, so that with the ARP reply, the host will think that this machine, the threat actor, is actually the correct MAC address for the remote default gateway, or for the default gateway, not remote default gateway, but default gateway. In which case, then typically this PCA and the switch will forward traffic out to this threat actor. And if the threat actor is smart, they grab a copy and then send it on to R1 so that R1 will actually get it. And so then they sit in the middle. Now, this same type of attack can be stopped by port security, okay? Because we can set port security and not allow enough MAC addresses to allow the threat actor to get access. The other thing that this can be stopped by, quite honestly, folks, is physical security. If you turn off ports that are not used, and so somebody comes in your classroom and plugs into a port that's in the floor and it's not turned on, then they can't do this attack. If they can't physically access the switch ports, then this attack is useless. So that's another way we can stop it.
So what are the trusted and untrusted ports? What does that involve?
That's getting into DHCP snooping, typically, is what we're talking about with that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. That's a little bit different. Trusted and untrusted is DHCP snooping, and it's basically who is allowed to send out DHCP offers and acknowledgments. So we'll talk about that in just a second, Joseph. Now, folks, this scares me. DNS attack scares me more than just about anything else on the internet. Simply because originally DNS was not designed to be secure, and DNS is so important. So when I click here and I type www.cheese.com, oops, didn't go to cheese.com. I went to a cheese.com, okay, which is your site for all things cheese. We use this kind of as a joke because one of our network technicians used to always use this as a way to test if you can get to the internet, because nobody's been to cheese.com. But cheese.com, when I put this in, I expect the DNS entry to take me to cheese.com. But what if a hacker has come in here and replicated this site with some kind of cross-site scripting, some type of login area that looks just like the bank I'm part of or some other company I'm part of? I put in the right DNS, but I go to a site that has malware on it, or I go to a site that is a fake site. You put in your username and password to log in, and it tells you, sorry, but no one, you can't log in right now. Try again later. Well, if it looks just like the real site, you think you've gone to the correct place. That is very, very dangerous. Okay. The other thing is this: what if we can just shut down DNS? Or what if DNS can be taken offline? The internet stops working. All email stops moving. Our web traffic stops. It's a mess. It's for this reason they've done a lot recently to try to increase the security of DNS. You know, a lot of people just use Google's Open DNS, but you know, you just have to be real careful. A lot of people don't know that one of the easiest ways to mess with DNS is to mess with the host file on a local computer. You know, I can go into the host file on a local computer and tell it to go to a certain site for cheese.com, and that file gets used first. And so you had to be very, very careful with DNS. It's definitely a problem. The other is this: they've started tunneling CNC traffic, botnet traffic through DNS, because you think about it, if we're using an open DNS, so we're using 8888, and you know, typically that means you've got to go out to the internet to resolve your DNS. Well, your DNS traffic's got to be able to go outside of your network. So you're allowing DNS queries outside of your firewalls. Well, hackers have figured this out, and they said, well, we'll use the different DNS record types, text, MX, serve, null, CNAMEs, and they will actually encode commands for CNC, or command and control, their botnets. Now, the only way to stop this is a firewall that has the ability to actually look all the way down into the DNS traffic and see what's being carried as payload in that traffic. Or it's you've got a firewall that has the ability to say, hey, this DNS request is taking a lot longer than normal. Why? Or it's bigger for some reason. The other thing you can do, quite honestly, is a lot of these newer firewalls have the ability to know what suspicious traffic, where it's going. And so it looks for where that DNS traffic may be trying to go, to maybe a command and control on the dark web, or a command and control somewhere on the internet that it knows about. So this, just like when now we've talked a little bit about IPv6 tunneling and how they're putting command and control traffic inside of IPv6, very difficult to stop without a high-end firewall. Now let's talk about good old Antdora. I talk about Antdora because the process of getting a DHCP is discover, offer, request, acknowledgement. So the client sends out a broadcast DHCP discover. Hey, I'd like to have an IP address. The server sends back an offer. Here's an IP address you can use. The client says, that's a mighty fine IP address. Can I use it? And then finally, the server says, yes, you can. Now, typically, this works without much problems, quite honestly. Now, the thing they don't show here is, well, they show one of them, the default gateway, which is an option. How many of you are familiar with DHCP options?
Like DNS and default gateway, stuff like that.
Exactly.
All the options that they do in the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're looking at this rolling here. So when you look at DHCP options, oh wait, my nephew was here and he absolutely loved this thing. But you look at DHCP options. You've got 003, which is the default gateway. You've got I believe it's 006, which is DNS. Then you've got, but you basically got DNS. You've got, used to have WINS. We don't use WINS anymore. There's even some older ones. I think this was 044, 046. That's showing my age there. There's domain name. All these are options that can be set in a scope. Well, one of the things you could do is if you could fake or hand out illegal, or let's say not illegal, but spoof DHCP, you could make the default gateway your PC so that everybody would come through your machine, okay? Or you could send them to your DNS server that's already got DNS poisoned. So that's one of the things we have to be very careful with DHCP. The other thing you can just do is just starve the DHCP server. In other words, request all the addresses so that legitimate clients can't get an IP address. So we can do that. Wrong gateway, wrong DNS. You know, when we send back an offer, what we can do, obviously you see here, if a threat actor can put a rogue DHCP server on the network, the way that DHCP works is typically the client will accept the first offer it gets, or will request the first offer it gets. So the closer the threat actor can be with a rogue DHCP server, the faster they can respond, or they may launch a denial of service attack against the DHCP server, and then allow that only their machine would be able to answer the DHCP request. Now, what you can do with DHCP snooping is you can go in and you can set trusted and untrusted ports. In other words, you would go in here and say that all the ports, except for the port that the DHCP server is on, are not trusted to provide offers. And so if the threat actor was here and tried to do a DHCP offer through this port, it would be rejected. You can also set, there's throttle limits. Okay, so you can actually set a throttle limit that's available, so that if a client is down here on a port and it's a hacker and they're trying to request thousands and thousands of DHCP, you can actually throttle the number of requests that are available. So that's what they're talking about when we talk about DHCP trust and using DHCP snooping to help prevent these types of attacks. That is now covered actually in the CCNA, folks. It's in the CCNA, I believe the third course. We've got it now. So
It is.
yep. So
They talk about DAI also.
yep, they do. Dynamic address inspection. Yep. In fact, DHCP snooping and DAI basically require each other. It's required. So HTTP, one of these here, folks, we kind of talk about the different types of messages. So 1XX messages are provisional responses, no required header. Successful is any 200 or 2XX, redirection is 3XX, client error is 4, like a 404 error, and then a server error is a 5 error, 5XX. We know this is one of the things that's very dangerous, these malicious iframes. The ability for someone to put into an iframe even just a little pixel that is a redirect to a hostile malware site. It's pretty easy to do. It is something that really the only way to stop it is to use some type of web proxy or some type of firewall that does dynamic inspection of where you are going on the internet. Most modern firewalls do that, and you talk about Cisco's got this umbrella service. The Palo Alto has its service. Most firewall vendors have a service that you can actually subscribe your firewalls to, and they will automatically be looking for these types of attacks and attempting to stop them. Are they perfect? No, but they try to block these types of malicious iframes. The other item here is a 302 cushioning, which is a way to redirect the client to a malware infected site. You know, when it responds with a 302, it provides the URL in the location field. It then believes that's the correct URL and will go to that new URL, or will try to go to that new URL. So if you can use a HTTP 302 cushioning attack, you're trying to redirect the client to a site that has malware on it, or has a rootkit or something that will install automatically. Again, the best way to stop that is with a very intelligent firewall or a web proxy type service. WSA Web Service Appliance that Cisco provides that type of service. Okay. Compromising domains, again, this is where you basically compromise the domain and then put in your own domain information and things there. We're constantly being hit with these. I had somebody try to send me something yesterday. It was a join this meeting something link. Of course, I didn't click it. It's unbelievable how many attacks we're getting daily in email, and it's crazy. But the good news is our newer email services are at least attempting to stop these, but they're not stopping all of them. I mean, so we're still the weakest link. We had to go back through again and have a full discussion about what not to click, don't click, because of in state of North Carolina alone, there's been 3 or 4 schools hit with ransomware attacks in just this since COVID, basically. The biggest obviously being CPCC, which is still really trying to recover from that. So,
Microsoft Teams sends a lot of these emails too that come in as warnings from the the yellow banner, we call it, in our office.
Yep.
And they're legitimate. So
the scary thing is, we use Teams internally, but what you have to look at in a way, and what they've done smartly in ours, is if it's a Teams meeting that's an external Teams request, then it's marked as being external. Now, I actually had an external Teams meeting yesterday with another school. So it is possible to do it. You just have to be, I was expecting them to send me the Teams meeting. I knew the meeting was going on. Where it gets in trouble is when you get Teams meetings and you don't have a meeting scheduled with anybody. And people will click it and boom, next thing you know, you're infected. Code injection, anytime a web exposed database is there, the way to help stop this is to put some type of filter in front of the SQL boxes to ensure that you can't send direct SQL code to any type of database. You need a front end to stop those. Cross-site scripting, obviously a web page is executed on a client with their own browser and then injected with some type of malicious script. Big thing there is make sure your developers know about the vulnerabilities and how to avoid them. Make sure you've got again, it all comes back to this web proxy that can block the malicious sites, because typically if an iframe or a cross-site scripting tries to send you to a malicious site, that site is typically known by these higher end security cloud vendors. It's typically known, and then it can be blocked fairly quickly. Any questions on these types of attacks? These are pretty cool, being able to look at this PCAP file and look at an attack on a MySQL database, and then just looking at your different logs that are available. So those are 2 good labs that are
I've seen a few questions on, they give you like a line and they say, what type of scripting is this? How do you tell if it's an injection or a cross scripting? Is there any particular way that you tell by looking at the line of code?
Yes, typically if it's a cross-site scripting, you'll look at it. It's going to be part of have HTML. It's going to have an HTML portion. It's going to be inside of a frame or inside of an HTML request. With SQL, I'd be looking for SQL, actual SQL code. So like gets, pulls, looking for queries, any type of SQL query. That's how I would do it. Gil, you got any, or Kirby, you're here. Julie, you got any ideas? Kirby, any ideas? We lost.
Oh, on the SQL injections, select from where is the typical standard language. Yep. And the PCAPs in those particular labs, it shows you that it's pretty clear. It's they're looking for users and passwords and stuff.
Yeah. So like I said, go ahead. I'm sorry, Julie.
I was just going to say, I think from a certification standpoint, just get used to the terminology that they're using in the questions. I mean, when you're actually looking at those trace files and stuff, it's pretty easy to tell where they're coming from once you get used to it. So yeah, I would say do the labs and make sure you're following along with the labs and make sure you're understanding what they're asking you and what you're looking at. And if as you're doing the labs, you have questions, then at that point, write them down and ask, either, send out an email or ask Kelly or something to have somebody help you figure out, how do I tell the difference between this one and this one?
You can see here on this one, you can see how they're actually looking for values in fields. And so that's one thing with the SQL statements, you know, string equals 1, 1. I always look for the SQL type, anything that's looking for fields or looking for.
Can you make it a little bit larger? That's one of the, let me see. I can't see.
Yeah, I can. So see, it's looking for.
Yeah, that's one of the ones from the lab, definitely.
That's actually the actual lab, correct? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the actual lab.
What would be the difference with the X was the cross script one? Is that we didn't do any on those, right?
We do. There is one later. I would be looking, instead of this, it would be looking at probably going to a JavaScript file, or looking more like a JavaScript code or some type of coding, instead of trying to pull actual just information out.
You know, let me send you a print screen to see if this is the question that I saw.
Yeah,
Maybe
see here
this
you're
might-
looking, you got union select database. I mean, this is telling me this, I mean, this is saying, look for any database with any username, first name admin. So you can look at this and kind of see that this is all SQL. So,
Now let me do a, does Zoom let you do a print screen or no?
no, just email it to me and I'll look at it, Joseph.
All right, good.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely go over it with you. We'll do that. Somebody's got put me in coach playing.
Oh, that's me. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I try to keep your beat going with.
There you go. There you go. All right, let's blow through 18 real quick, folks. This one is not hard. This has got a little bit of a lot of Security Plus stuff in it again, but I do stress to my students assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. And one thing that I think they do a very poor job in this class of is defining the most important asset that we have, and that is your employees. I teach a lot of military classes, and you'll see here that they say asset, anything of value to the organization that must be protected, including servers, infrastructure devices, end devices, and the greatest asset, data. Yeah, that's true. But where the military gets things right is they understand that their people are assets. We don't think that way, but you need to make sure that your assets are, you know, you understand your employees are an asset. And the example I always use is Katrina. Now let's think about, or any natural disaster, folks. If you are an IT business and you are going to require, let's say you got a disaster recovery plan or some type of disaster plan, and I am an IT professional, and I have to make the choice of coming in and taking care of the servers and databases or taking care of my family, more than likely, I'm going to make the choice to take care of my family. I think that's something people don't think about with their assets, is if you're going to have a disaster recovery plan, and I mean a true disaster, something really goes sideways, you need to be able to get the people that need to be on site, but you also need to make sure that their families are taken care of. Otherwise, they're not coming on site. You also need to realize that those people, your assets, people are a big vulnerability, but they're also a huge asset to your organization. So I think they should identify, when you go to identify assets, make sure your students understand it's people too. Because, you know, there's been a lot of organizations that had another company come in and snipe out one of their best people. And next thing you know, that company is unable to do its job as well as it was. You know, that particular person was identified as someone who could be, you know, I'd say turned or used as an asset for someone to get into your company. So make sure you mention that. I know they don't mention it here, but I think that's a problem. I think that people, your employees, should be mentioned as an asset, because there are vulnerabilities in employees. In fact, I would say our biggest vulnerabilities are employees. And so, you know, they're exploited by threat actors all day long. And then any potential danger to an asset is a threat. So we do need to identify these. I like to have students in my classroom when we're in class and I'm teaching this section. I say, okay, I want you to look around this class and I want you all to write down 4 or 5 assets in this classroom. And then we go about, okay, now let's talk about vulnerabilities to these assets, fire, theft, etc. And then we talk about the threats that could be, you know, well, that's potential danger, the threats, and then vulnerabilities. And then we talk about how we can overcome those threats and vulnerabilities. In other words, do we buy insurance? Do we install a sprinkler system? You know, my data center has a automatic fire suppression system in it. And I read, oh, did anybody see the fire at the data center, or yes, a data center in Europe that burned? I mean, it burned the whole data center down. And they think it was a UPS issue, but a couple large corporations were actually offline for a while. But that was pretty wild.
Yeah, that was one of our main things at a company I worked for. I was on the disaster recovery team. We had to go practice every 6 months.
Yeah.
You'd take all your stuff and go fly to a different city, and it was a pain, but it was good to know that we were prepared, you know.
Yeah. You basically, I mean, I'm not a prepper, but it's almost like having a go bag, you know. You have all the stuff you need to know that if a disaster occurs, we can go to this other site. I am interested, Julian, in corporate America, did they have a plan for your family, or did they just say, well, they're on their own?
At the time, no, but it's been quite a while.
Right.
I mean, I've been out of corporate America for probably 15 years.
Right.
But no, there wasn't too much of a plan. It was more of a, I mean, I think the company I worked for would have done that, but
Right.
Our job was, like, I was the network person that went on the team, and then there was a couple of server guys, and, you know,
Right.
everybody else, you know, because I'm in Missouri, our
Right.
general prep was for a tornado.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
your tornado alley.
Right. And so that's what we were prepping for, was what happens if everything was stored off site in the caves, and you basically went and picked up your box, and or, you know, one person went and got all of our boxes. But
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they planned it from, you know, you get the phone call, let's go. So I mean, it was, you had to really be ready. It was kind of creepy in some ways.
Well, but you know what though? I mean, the good news, I'm glad you never had to use it, but at the same time, every year companies are completely leveled by tornadoes in Missouri. I mean, you know.
I know, that's a true statement.
Yeah. So it's good that they were prepared. I do think that's a good thing. I think I will say this: in academia, we are woefully unprepared for anything like that. You know, our IT teams have some ideas about things, but they're not. They could take some lessons from corporate America for sure.
Well, with the 9/11, we used to have I work for a utility company. We have what we call business continuity drills.
Yep.
And you would relocate people to a particular building. But now, I mean, that worked a little bit with Sandy, but now with this whole pandemic thing, I think all the disaster recovery drills are all going to be unwritten now. They're going to be all rewritten now. What do you think about that?
That is a good point. That is a very good point, because you know, our whole disaster recovery plans most time were around, let's all get everybody that needs to be together. But that changes drastically with a pandemic, because then you don't want those people together. You know, it even comes down to when you start now, and not to make light of COVID. COVID is a very bad disease, but it's not Ebola. You know, you're not gonna die in 7 days from it. But imagine a pandemic where it was, you know, highly contagious and also deadly within days or hours. You know, hours would be an extreme, but within days. You don't want your whole network team together, because you could lose the whole network team. So yeah, I do think there's going to be some looks at how you do that. The other thing is, there'll be a move, I think, to more warm sites. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the concept of warm, cold. So basically, you probably are familiar with this, but you've got the idea of there's a hot site, and basically that is, you've got a disaster recovery site that has almost a pure replica of your existing IT infrastructure, and you literally just flip a switch and your IT infrastructure boots up 200 miles away. Best case scenario, most expensive. A warm site would be you've got enough to bring it up. It's not an automatic thing. You can't flip a switch and go to another data center, but with pretty minimal work, you can go in and have at least most of your network up and running. And then there's a cold site, and a cold site it's a facility without the network connected. You can go in, there should be enough servers and switches and things that you can rebuild your network, but there's a lot of manual labor in that. The other problem with a lot of cold sites. Go ahead,
Ours
Julie.
was a cold site. Ours was a cold site.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, we flew to Philadelphia.
Okay. The other problem with a cold site is this. Sometimes these cold site vendors will lease out, they'll oversubscribe their service, thinking that, I've subscribed to somebody in Missouri, somebody in California, somebody in Washington, that all three of these, there's no way they're all three going to have a major disaster at the same time. And so you need to be careful with cold sites to make sure they've got enough materials to handle if all of their, I would ask the question, if all of your customers had an outage at the same time, could you handle it at your cold site?
And see, and ours was guaranteed.
Okay.
We would have what we needed. Like, we paid extra for, you cannot boot us out, basically.
Okay. Well,
and
then
you have
that's,
to make sure our stuff works.
yeah, that's the key. You've got to make sure basically you got an SLA with them, service level agreement, and you say that we will have our stuff, and like I said, you pay more for that.
Yep.
And you can get less. You can say we're going to roll the dice and say that more than likely all three of those places won't have an outage at the same time, so we're willing to roll the dice. It's just like insurance. It's, do you buy comprehensive insurance on an older car or don't you? Really it just comes down to what's worth it in the end.
Right.
Which reminds me, I need to take comprehensive off my old car.
So what type of expertise is needed to write these policies for the cybersecurity that we're talking about now? These are mostly policies that you would have in place,
Yep.
right?
Right. Exactly. As we move down, I'm gonna blow through this banking threat thing, because I will say one of the things we've seen with banking is it seems that they're not really they're attacking the banks, no doubt, folks, that's happening. But they'd much rather just get your credit card number because it's easier to attack you than it is to attack the bank itself. I haven't heard of a large amount of well, and here's the thing, we probably wouldn't hear about it if it was a large attack, unless they were required to let us know. But what we get down in here, I do want to talk about the onion versus the artichoke just real quick, then we'll get to the policies, Joseph. But used to be we thought about network security as the network security onion. In other words, we had assets here, and as we had all these layers we would peel off, and you would cry as you got to the assets. Well, with our distributed borderless networks now, it's more of an artichoke, in that it takes very little to get to the heart of good data or stuff that they need. This is probably even much worse now because of the pandemic, because you have to think the edge of every network pretty much in America, or in the world, actually in the world, the edge of every network in the world has been extended to the individual desktops in people's homes, or their phones, or their tablets. So we've extended the network as far as we can extend it. And that's actually how many of these attacks have been taking place on some of the schools, is they've been using compromised personal computers to then get into networks. So that's,
well, all these web-based, these applications like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Has anyone even checked the vulnerabilities of those?
well, more and more vulnerabilities are being found every day. That's the big thing. There's so many more, and there'll be more learned as hackers, see it as a good avenue. So yeah, I mean, there's many out there we don't even know about. So they're working on those every day. And you know how fast we had to move to it. So it wasn't like we were able to check all these things and ensure, that individual computers were clean or anything of that nature. So it's been tough. If I was an actual IT administrator, and I do, like I said, I run my data center, so I stay semi-terrified anyway. But if I was an actual IT administrator right now, I would probably be terrified beyond belief, simply because of how far our security has had to push out into individual homes versus the more tightly controlled. I think the companies that were already set up to do a lot of remote work, won the lottery on this deal. But even they, are being stressed because they didn't have it set to have everybody working from home. So yeah, let's talk about these policies. So business policies, getting together, writing the security policy for the company. Those company policies. Now these are the company policies are everything from HR stuff, who you go to if there's a complaint, what your hours are going to be, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. Employees policies, that's HR stuff too. And then down we've got our security policies, and these security policies set the security standard for the company, what is acceptable, what is not, what is expected of employees, how certain levels of training that are going to be required, gives, really lets the security staff have the backing of the top level, C-level, basically the CEO, CFO, all those folks need to be in support of the security policy. Inside of that policy are all of these different things like identification, authentication, who gets a login account. If you're an adjunct faculty, how do we go about getting you a login account? How do we go about getting you hired into the college? Password policies, minimum requirements when they change, acceptable use, what you can and cannot do. Now, I will say that for most educational institutions, the acceptable use policy is broader than in business because of the fact that we are educational institutions. So that's something that is a little different between business and education. Remote access policy, incident handling procedures, and then there would also be, as part of these policies, a disaster, or should be a disaster recovery policy. So a policy that says, how do we handle a true disaster taking place on the network? And then this one is getting to be more and more of a problem as people bring most people use their phone as a computer now. So a BYOD, what do you do when you bring your own device into the network? It could be a phone, it could be your own laptop, it could be any of those things. So what's the policies for BYOD? As for some of our stuff, if we put it on our phone, you have to accept letting IT make changes to your phone. For that reason, I don't put it on my personal phone. They don't provide me a phone. So I hate to say it, I just don't feel like they should have the ability to wipe my phone remotely if they don't pay for it. So with these BYOD policies, sometimes those policies mean that, and rightfully so, but they mean that I decide as an individual that I'm not going to use some resource because it is an invasion of what I consider my privacy or my personal possessions. But the BYOD policy is important because you got to be able to control what is on your network if they're going to connect to your network. That would be good if my nephew's lost his phone, if we had the Find My Device feature turned on, which we didn't. But that's
also with the Office 365, people using that remotely too. That creates. Is there any security vulnerability with that? Because they have to be authenticated to use that with OneDrive.
Yep, it definitely. If the local machine's compromised, then obviously they could get the usernames and passwords. And then you're looking at the ability to get on a OneDrive. Now, what if it's a shared OneDrive where it's got the worst case scenario would be, imagine a member of the IT department's machine is compromised and they're accessing remote machines using administrator level logins and those types of things. So yeah, that could definitely be a big issue. So. Okay, folks, I'm gonna have to stop here. I've run out of time. We'll pick back up next week, continue on. Are there any questions before we stop for the day? No questions, everybody good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, remember again, don't forget if you need to do the hands-on assessment or want to do it, the final, it's called the skills assessment right here. So that's where it's at under NetAcad, and then upload the document into NetAcad. On NetLabs, and upload the document on NetAcad and email it to me if you can do both. And that way, just make sure I get it. I usually respond when I get it and tell you that I do have it.
When's that due by, Kelly?
It's not due till, I think it's May.
Okay.
It's like May 9th or something. I
Okay.
think May 11th. Yeah,
So we
I
can
don't
do
have
that
it due
later
until the
on.
very, very end of class. Because like I said, our class doesn't end until May 11th. I
Those
think
list
the
of,
actual end date's the 10th or 9th, but I always push the class back a couple days just so that we have some time.
the list of summer courses, are you the instructor for all those courses?
No,
Kelly?
I am not. In fact, that's one of the strange things about the summer. We have a large grant where I am actually teaching four classes for historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. So my summer schedule, I will not be an instructor for any of these classes this summer. One of your classmates will be an instructor for some of them, Kirby. He actually is one of our ITQ certified folks and teaches for us. I don't have the exact names down yet. I'm fairly certain for DevNet Associate, it will be Dan Abergetti. So on the other ones, I don't have, and you may see my name pop up for a CCNP class just because I've got a class of 17 and they want to get the second class and I don't want to leave them stranded. But I'm already on crazy overload for the summer.
Is Dan half as good as you? Because then that would be acceptable.
Dan is excellent. Dan is an excellent instructor, yes. And so is Kirby. Both of them are excellent instructors. Dan runs Dan's courses on YouTube. If you want to look, Dan actually is a very, very good instructor. So
Because you've set the baseline, you know that.
Oh no, I don't know about that. I'm glad I set it low so Kirby won't have any trouble beating it. So, okay, folks, I'm gonna stop
That's
the
funny.
recording.